It's looking good so far. It's a very pretty slide.
Big fan.
Okay, ready?
No, I'm not.
On your mark. Get set.
Give me some time. Alright. So today I'm going to present about liberal arts education model in Vietnam and the purpose of borrowing it and how it's adapted in my country's context. And this is particularly of my personal interest because as a career I want to work for youth development and education policies. And so I've been looking for an alternative model that is different from Vietnam's traditional way of teaching. And liberal arts is apparently one of those. And so I would be interested in the effort of bringing liberal arts into Vietnamese context. And we actually just have our first liberal arts university 3 years ago. So this is a presentation about that school and how it is carried out. So I have two major questions. One is why liberal arts? Why do Vietnamese actors choose this model instead of other models? And the second question is, what elements of liberal arts are incorporated and adapted in Vietnamese context? And so quick outline, I'll talk about two literatures that I reviewed and methodology data. I'll go into quick analysis and end with a short discussion. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about, my first literature review, is what exactly is the liberal arts? And for this, I will trace the historical and philosophical development of this model in the United States. Kimball, in 1995, wrote the book with Authors and Philosophers. He traced the idea of liberal arts all the way before Common Era. And he said there were two big classical models. The first one is the humanist one. This sees liberal arts, the liberal in liberal arts, as freedom from slavery. So basically it implies that wealthy citizens have high social status as opposed to slaves, can afford free time and leisure to study, to get educated, so they can actually participate in the political society. And so the goal of the education there would be humanity, morality, and noble virtue. And the second view of liberal arts here interpret liberal as freedom from ignorance. And so they really emphasize the pursuit of truth, meaning that they develop skepticism, critical thinking, and reasoning. Eventually, humanistic view gained popularity, especially in Europe and England, and it traveled all the way to America with a colony. And it was not majorly contested until the 19th century. Around this time, a lot of Americans went to Germany to study, and they really liked the German model of research university. And this model is more philosophical side, more truth-seeking. And so they like the scientific method and very specialized research that happened in Germany. They brought it back and tried to popularize it in America. Now, these two forces keep going back and forth, and there are multiple attempts to reconcile these two camps under the same umbrella. One of the major efforts was the creation of general education. Sounds familiar? So this term was created by Hutchin in 1936. He was the president of the University of Chicago at the point. It's also supported by Harvard University a decade later. And basically, Hutchin argues that their education should be divided into two. One is general education, and then you go to higher education, higher learning. And general education here implies the humanistic liberal arts. You learn common language and coherence in cultural heritage. And then you can move up to higher learning, which basically means professional studies and specialized research. So these ideas particularly influential. It inspires other university and colleges around America to find their own adaptation and accommodation of both humanistic and philosophical view of liberal arts. And I also want to introduce modernism, a major force in the 20th century. And this one really trumps progress and economic development over anything. Not even humanity, not truth-seeking, it's economic development. And so they argue that the liberal arts is in fact really useful and really needed, not because they cultivate humanity or figure out the truth, but it's because they develop in student ethics, discipline, critical thinking, reasoning ability, problem-solving ability that are needed in a changing global world. And this is under the context of industrialization and fast growth. That's why they really needed those skills. They see liberal arts as the answer. And this is pretty much the image in global trend right now in terms of liberal arts. They see liberal arts as instrumental, through an instrumental value lens. And so a lot of other countries around the world, particularly Asia, adopt this model because this model will satisfy global market demands. All of these skills, so cultural competency, adaptability, flexibility, and you name that. And that is a segue into my second literature review about political borrowing and lending. Because in a way, liberal arts model traveling to different countries is a form of borrowing and education model. So this literature is saturated with two major points, the purpose and the process of borrowing. Explored by Gina Steiner-Hamsey, this woman right here, super powerful. She brought a very influential idea of why education policies are adopted elsewhere. And she said, well, the political rights, it allows a third neutral options for national actors to legitimize and justify their national agenda. And so to avoid contestation within their own country, they bring up another option from elsewhere, and they go with the best practice, the international standard. And they bring it in and say, here you go. The international world does this is why it's justified. So it does not really mean that this practice is good itself, it justifies whatever national actors want to happen in their country at the particular point. And second, she also said that economic-wise, a lot of poor countries adopt education reform because they need these to appeal to grants and loans of from international organizations like the World Bank, for example. And these are short-lived because they just try to satisfy the requirement of international actors instead of actually want to make a change in their own country. And the process of adapting a policy from another country is also not a linear one. It's very discursive, and they generally adopt a vague discourse related to that policy and reconceptualize it to fit in the local context. An example is seen in Stilova's 2004, actually, not 2002, who studied Latvian's education reform in the 1990s, upon the fall of Soviet Union. And she argues that they reformed because they wanted to join the EU, and the EU wanted multiculturalism. Okay, I'll adopt multiculturalism. But at the same time, they also wanted to separate the Latvian and the Russian identity within their own country. And the discourse of multiculturalism is accommodating both of these happening within their own country. So that brings me back to my present study. Not a lot of research has been done on liberal arts model in other countries through the lens of policy borrowing and lending, and so I decided to do that using my country as a case study. And so I would also explore the purpose and the process. Now, methodology and data, I use the method put out by Riesby and Lengard. They are both Australian professors and researchers in international education policy. And I propose three different methodologies. First one is contextual analysis. I will look into the formation of the policy within Vietnamese context. Second is critical discourse analysis. Basically, I will read closely the policy text and try to understand what discourse this text is trying to bring out, and also how they interpret liberal arts. And third, I propose to have interviews with major actors in the adoption of liberal arts model in Vietnam, and understand their motivation and interpretation of what this means to Vietnamese education. However, because access to these major actors are often only granted to very seasoned and experienced researchers, this remains my proposal. So I don't actually carry out any research. However, in terms of data, I do look at official documents, news and publications relating to the foundation of the school and liberal arts in Vietnam in general. I also look at interviews with major actors in the process. And at the same time, I compare this Vietnamese school's model with Harvard Liberal Arts School and key competencies in the global world, in the global market put out by OECD and UNESCO. So now is my actual analysis. I'll try to go fast. So I look at the Fulbright Vietnam University, Fulbright University Vietnam. I think that's how it's supposed to be, FUV. So this school, a little bit of context, is actually the evolution of a different program called the Fulbright Economic Teaching Program that was created in 1994 by the Harvard Vietnam program. And so that teaching program was created because Vietnam was transitioning from command economy to the market economy. And that Harvard team identified the problem as Vietnam wanting to integrate into global economy but does not have the human capital to do that. And so FUV, upon its foundation, also echoed a similar problem that it identified in Vietnam society. And so it offered a solution of developing human capital. So all of these don't really echo any liberal arts traditional value. They echo the liberal neoliberal ideas. But I want to ask, why liberal arts and why now? So the economic teaching program really shaped the Vietnamese problem as it's about the demand of the market. You ought to respond to international demands. But why now? Because actually in the early 1990s, Vietnam did experiment with the liberal arts and it failed, did not gain attention. So why now again? And I think two things are happening. One is there's a huge trend of studying abroad from Vietnamese students in the United States. There are more than 20,000 Vietnamese students right now in the United States. And that just signifies that there's a high demand for American style teaching among the Vietnamese citizens. And second of that is a lot of Vietnamese actors and faculty, staff, curriculum designers within FUV are actually Vietnamese that enjoy American higher education, especially with the liberal arts. And they all share in common in the interviews that they want to bring this model or this teaching style and introduce that to Vietnam. And so I argue that it's actually their motivation that brought this model back to Vietnam alongside with the global force. And so how does the adaptation process look like? This is still an ongoing research, but I basically look at learning outcome model, curriculum, and pedagogy. These are the three main points that I look at in FUV and compare it with first Harvard University and second the international standards relating to economic growth. And once again, the interpretation of FUV in terms of the value of liberal arts echoes both Harvard's statement and the OECD statement. It's all about social and economic progress, about tackling global challenge. But for FUV, they also specify this is also about tackling Vietnamese problem. And so they really try their best to gear it toward the Vietnamese society. They repeat again and again in their statement of mission that this is not a replication of an American institution. This is a reimagination of what a university should be and its relation with the society. Basically here is meaning the Vietnamese society. And so when I look at the Vietnamese outcome model of FUV, they have knowledge, skill, and mindset as the three major pillars of growth. And this actually echoes the OECD PSAS assessment for global competence. They also have knowledge, cognitive and social skill, value and attitude, which basically means mindset. So they quite align with what the international organizations classify as key competencies for economic growth. And they bring it up to be the outcome of education. When I compare curriculum, the reason why I chose Harvard is because this program was sponsored by Harvard team, and that's where I first come to see if they actually borrow anything from Harvard. They borrow quite a lot. They keep the interdisciplinary nature of liberal arts because that's the selling point of this model, basically. And they try to tailor it to Vietnamese context, and they keep a lot of subjects that are particular to Vietnam. So Vietnamese study, Vietnamese art, and history as core classes that you have to take. And the way they shape the major is really interesting. After taking core classes and classes from different division, you go into your major. But they don't have a set class for what the major entails. Instead, they ask the student what the student wants to research. They work closely with the faculty member to figure out what core classes that major would mean and do a capstone project. So it's, again, tailoring to Vietnamese context. I also look at pedagogy. This is interesting in relation to curriculum because there's a debate on whether the school should keep Ho Chi Minh ideology in the curriculum. Ho Chi Minh ideology is basically a political education program that every single student in Vietnamese public university has to take. And it's very much a political education thing. But FUB state that they will keep it, but use a different pedagogy. They will introduce it in relation to historical and political context, in relation to Marxism and Leninism, and different stages of history. And so not as an ideology that you should take for your own, but an ideology to be criticized and to be understood. And so this kind of echo that critical thinking part that liberal arts has to offer. Okay, so I just quickly sum it up. Liberal arts model is borrowed in Vietnam because there is a global force of demanding skills for economic development in this country. However, it's more clear that national actors actively want to borrow this model in order to introduce new curriculum and new pedagogy, new teaching style in Vietnamese higher education. But there are lingering questions about this model. And one of that is why did Harvard actively get involved in this process and want to land this model? And the second question I have would be, how is this implemented? This is the second year of the university. We still don't have enough data to actually understand how the society receive this model. And that would translate into another research question I think in future we can carry out. That is, can this university ignite a reforming education system in Vietnam as it has envisioned? Can it actually motivate other universities to adopt a similar teaching style? Okay. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Luke, why don't you get your